Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to a in-person live version of Horticulture Podcast. And you heard me right. We're all sitting in the same room. I'm actually very, very close to all these gentlemen right now trying to get
We've had a lot of caffeine. So this is a recipe for even more of a disaster than we sometimes involve ourselves
There is
in.
Diet Mountain Dew involved in this podcast, people.
Very close.
So.
Some might say too close.
To the edge.
Very close.
So awesome. Well, we are talking about, this is a Josh-centric episode today. So
No pressure, Josh.
Yeah,
no pressure, man.
pressure. And this, I get to play the dummy who gets to ask questions like, I don't know what's going on. So I'm really excited
That's
about
correct.
that.
Oh, so you're playing the dummy.
Playing
Got
the
it.
dummy. I mean, I got to give him something, right? to go
Noted.
off of. So Josh, what are we chatting about today?
The ecosystem services of landscape plants.
Which is a lot of big words. Tell me more.
That's correct. Well, plants do things for us.
What? No.
And beyond even
I
just
thought
agriculture.
landscapes were just supposed to look pretty. I mean, isn't that what it's all about?
They do look pretty, but they can do other things for us as well. Things
just
besides.
like you, Josh. You're not just here to look pretty.
Right. Although that is
Let's
most
hope
of what I do.
That's
Yes, no, plants can do things. They can clean our air. They can moderate the temperature around us. Everything within that realm of ecosystem services fits into these different categories, right?
But before we even jump into that, maybe like on the landscape, we're talking about landscape plants versus what, as opposed to what?
Agricultural plants.
Yeah,
Crops.
like wild forests.
Oh, I thought you were going like the hardscape and softscape route.
Oh, no, not yet. No, I'm not even going that.
Gotcha.
I get where you're going with this. Yeah, the term that I've heard used that I started repeating once I heard it was the built environment, the area where humans live and create their own habitats for activity and recreation. So these are the places where we put plants specifically on purpose. And what do they do for us in those places?
So it could be like along in a city park, but it could also be along streets.
Right.
It could be in people's yards.
Yeah.
It could be around their houses. It could be around buildings, businesses or libraries or whatever.
Right. The curb cut in front
Just
of McDonald's.
In general, we're talking about those. Yeah.
You know that thing you see when you're in the drive-through.
that lone little boxwood.
all the winter-killed boxwoods.
Those Stella de Oro daylilies.
Yeah.
We can tell you have strong opinions.
That and Nandina, man.
And so within that side of things, the landscaping side, there's been maybe traditionally some plants that have risen to the top, become popular, etc. But there's some other ones we might suggest or consider that have this sort of like more of they play a role in the landscape and in the ecosystem. I just wanted to make sure everybody on the same page about
Yeah,
landscape.
that's definitely a big piece of it is what they can do for us in these places, because these places are where there can be a lot of human activity that can create issues around it. A lot of, say, carbon monoxide or activities related to industry, incomplete combustion, things like that. And those are, let's say, environmental contaminants that can cause problems for certain trees. And that's where we, can put together lists of landscape plants that not only tolerate those conditions, but can work to alleviate them as well. Sort of this idea of the trees being the lungs of the city and being able to filter out things for us.
So I'm hearing landscape is not only form, but also function then.
Totally.
Yeah.
100%.
And the two aren't, I realize the two aren't, distinct of one another. I guess you could accomplish both in a well-done system, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wish that was my senior superlative, like both form and function.
Most form and function. Formal and function.
Mine was similar, but mine was most
Formulated.
formidable and functionless. Unlike our landscapes should not be that way, by the way. No.
Well, they don't have to be. It doesn't have. They can work for us, I guess.
I don't know. It's interesting, working with people like when you're talking about landscapes, and I know, Josh, you've written a publication I hope you talk a lot about today. It's an impressive publication, and it deals with, it seems like larger scale systems as well as some small scale elements. But I learned a long time ago when you start to talk about them or talk about something like landscaping with folks, you really have to start with, it seems like, people's objectives for that landscape, because we joke, man, we said form and function, and we've touched on the aesthetics, but a lot of times it's that function. What do they want a landscape to do, or what do they want it to be? That seems like that's an important aspect, I guess, Josh.
Yeah, I would say that that's a kind of a key aspect when you're talking to people, is to find out what are they willing to invest, or what are they willing to avoid. Like the function aspect is a good way to kind of bring it up, but is this an area that you want to have to spend every week mowing, or at least 22-ish weeks out of the year, and all the kind of energy and labor costs associated with that? Or do you want it to be something we would consider to be a lower maintenance landscape? Is this an area you want to spend time in, relaxing or doing some kind of work? Or are you specifically looking for kind of alleviating noise issues? Traffic is one of the kind of biggest noises that one hears in the urban environment constantly, and you can use plants to block that. They're much more effective than just a sheer wall, whereas a wall will kind of create echoes and things like that. The sort of complicated surface of landscape plants has a way of deadening noise pollution.
It like absorbs it.
Right.
It's a sponge.
Right. Yeah, it does
So
more observing.
much like rock and roll, landscape plants ain't noise pollution, or can help with. Sorry,
maybe mitigate noise, mitigate rock and roll. Noise pollution. Yes, noise pollution.
Yeah. So those, kind of noise attenuation and
Josh is just back
air
to
quality improvement.
He's ignoring us.
I didn't really know where to go.
He says being in the same room with these people face to face is not a pleasurable experience.
I no longer like any of
Yes.
It's difficult stuff.
But back to landscape ecosystems.
Another really key one, or a key ecosystem service that landscape plants provide for us is, and this will sound complicated at first, but kind of an energy conservation, or I like thinking and using these terms in my head as microclimate regulation, right? So trees, like for example, planting a deciduous tree somewhere.
Trees that loses its leaves,
Correct,
things like a maple or an oak.
Yeah. Trees that will lose their leaves and allow more sunlight penetration. Those are good for trying to, let's say, blocking sunlight in the summertime, but still letting some through in the wintertime. Something that you want to think about, that kind of seasonality when choosing what you want the tree to provide. Which, a large tree, even when it loses all its leaf, is still going to shade out some stuff, but it won't be as pronounced as it is in the summer. Whereas if you're looking for something to kind of block or control wind year round, then you want to go with an evergreen, something like that, and thinking about where prevailing winds come from at what time of the year and what will be there, what leaves will be there to kind of provide that.
Our all these subdivisions would be very different places if they had planted with those types of thoughts in mind. I would say, like, not only is it like we talk about that right tree, right place. We say that all the time, right? And we mostly, when we say that, are talking about, making sure that you're putting a species in that can tolerate, maybe that really heavy clay soil or extra water, or full sun or shade or whatever. But what we don't often talk about is what you're saying, Josh, is like that right tree, right place, as in, should it be deciduous? Should it be evergreen? Do you want it to block wind and sound for you? Or do you want it to shade your backyard so that you can go outside more often? And maybe keep the grass shorter because of the shade.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that, but the right tree, right place. We are almost always talking about what can we plant here that will survive and do well. Whereas this is kind of the flip side of this. What do we want to do well there, right? And thinking about it from the perspective of what is the function of that tree in this place.
It's the full perspective. Like it's not just one or the other. It should be all of that combined.
I just want to take a very brief break to acknowledge that the form of beautiful trees is amazing, and that we're talking a lot about function, but we're all plant lovers here. And so if it feels a little too utilitarian and mercenary in our approach to trees, we're just taking a time out from all the hippy dippy stuff for today so that we can talk about some functional stuff. But we all gush at a beautiful plant, beautiful tree.
Well, you can have a beautiful redbud or a dogwood or a,
Ginkgo.
ginkgo. You can have a beautiful tree, but also put it in the place where it's not only going to thrive, but make sure that it's shade in the backyard or doing something like that. Trees are so multi-purpose, but not just trees,
Yeah.
right? Like there's shrubs and stuff
Yeah.
that also are a part of all of this.
Right. I guess I should reference this publication that I'm relying upon that was put together several years ago. Is you can look it up by the number in the University of Kentucky system. It's HO121, Ecosystem Services of Landscape Plants, a guide for consumers and communities. And anyway, there's a lot of good tools in there, but something, when we're talking about the function of a tree in a place, there's a really great tool that is still working that was put together in concert with the U.S. Forest Service and Davey Tree, which is like a worker-owned arborist corporation or company that works in the eastern half of the U.S. for landscape management. But it's called iTree Tools.
I love iTree.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie to you.
Tell me about your experiences with iTree.
Okay, so my experience is limited, and I sat in a classroom in Frankfurt and was like trying to learn how to use this software, and like there are so many cool things to it. And one of my favorites. So I work a lot with like cities who are doing plantings, right? City, county plantings, and trying to mitigate like stormwater and shading the sidewalks, and all the things that you're talking about, but on more of a city scale and not just homeowner. And so it was fascinating to be like, oh, well, we could record these trees and let people know what they're doing for the local environment. Because, sometimes when we're working with people, they're like, why is this tree taking up space that a car could be parking or
Right.
whatever? And so you can say, oh, it's lowering the temperature by this amount, by getting all this data in. But there was so much it could do that it was overwhelming. And
Sure.
it was like for a normal person to use who didn't use it every single day, which I think a lot of people would be like that. There was a lot that went into it, and like if I pulled it up right now, I probably couldn't. I probably couldn't do anything.
I had to refamiliarize myself with it the other day. It's not if you focus on the tree part of it. Like essentially this website, the itreetools.org. When you go there, you can put in an address.
Mm-hmm.
You can draw sort of the structures that you're interested in finding out about, energy conservation, energy savings associated with it, and then pick a tree and essentially kind of plant it and tell it what the diameter at breast height is or the circumference. Mm-hmm. And then you can have it model over the years what sort of cost savings are associated with energy conservation, stormwater runoff, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And it'll, basically put out like a PDF document that'll tell you like this is what it'll do in year 1 where you started, year 20 down the road, and it'll give you all the kind of cumulative data. I remember when I first discovered it, I thought it would be a great tool for someone who is doing or providing kind of landscape services as a way to articulate to someone why it's important to take care of a tree that is in their landscape, instead of just seeing it as something that provides risk, right? Nobody wants to have a tree fall on their house. But if you keep a tree alive, if you think of trees and landscape plants as infrastructure and that, require a little bit of maintenance, that they can provide a lot for you.
Well, and one way I wanted to use it was to save a tree from being cut down.
Right, exactly.
So those of you who maybe want to save a tree, sometimes you got to put, unfortunately, have to put a money value on things. And so if you can attach data, and maybe that's money, maybe that's just, that it helps places not flood, not necessarily just dollars, but helping something not flood or lower temperature and therefore, AC usage or something. A lot of times that catches attention when you're dealing with people who are giving you a fraction of a second to talk to them.
Sure. Yeah. Think of it as a tool to help you advocate for the trees that
you can be a Lorax. You can. I want to live my life. I want to be the Lorax. He's sassy and also saves trees, and I feel like that's who I want to be when I grow up. So just saying.
Tools like that, it's kind of cool because it appeals to a person that thinks maybe differently. That's what I love about that tool. It puts an economic figure as far as when you're trying to do the pros and cons and weighing cost measures and cost cutting measures. The thing I love about that is you can assign numbers that with research backing over time, yes, the benefits may be amortized over a time scale that's a little bit longer, but at least you have something that shows there is a ROI, return on investment. And of course, we all know that as plant lovers. We know, there's lots of return on investment for planting perennials like trees. But for someone that may not be so accustomed to that, it seems just like a great tool to assign numbers. I love that.
Yeah, and in that advocacy angle, it definitely talks about these are your heating and cooling savings, right? But for something like stormwater runoff, that's not something we normally think of as the individual having to pay for. But if you think of trees being able to reduce stormwater runoff for their community, that can end up saving communities lots of money.
Sure.
It talks about the value of the trees.
And
to the
like
community.
soil stabilization and, we talk about all the different angles, but that to me is almost like an architectural feature of a site. We talk a lot about the architectural aspects of landscaping, creating rooms and defining spaces. When you have large commercial spaces, you're always trying to bring the size of those spaces down. Well, trees and other plant materials and landscapes can do that. I know it's not an ecosystem service, but it's kind of another feature that's related to some of the things you're talking about. And they have all these secondary benefits when you install these things. Especially in the larger commercial plantings, because you tend to have larger spaces and you're doing just the opposite of what homeowners sometimes want to do, which is make small spaces feel bigger. Well, in these big commercial landscapes, a lot of times our job was to make bigger spaces feel smaller. And you can do all of that with the architectural design of these spaces, and you get all these benefits that you're talking about.
One thing on the stormwater runoff component, with something that in hearing you talk about this before, that it was an eye-opening moment for me, but you're talking about the role that the canopy plays in that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And you gave me the example of imagining myself walking out and shaking. Yeah, maybe you can say that was what made it come alive for me.
Well, yeah, when it rains, a lot of essentially what you want to think of trees as a form of infrastructure, and things like concrete and channels and things like that are gray infrastructure, whereas trees are green infrastructure, and they essentially expand the ability of your gray infrastructure to do its job by slowing rainfall down from hitting these quick drainage points. And they do that by having this kind of varied and intense surface area that catches rainwater, and it doesn't hold it permanently, but it holds it for a long time, and it tries to channel it at a slow enough rate that the plant itself can take it up, and that so that it never runs off, essentially.
I guess something related to that, it would not be trees, but does that kind of get into the concept of like, I know rain gardens are typically things other than trees, but is that a related concept of like the ecological role of plants in a landscape?
Riparian buffers, I think, would be like, that's their whole point.
Which I know a lot of work was done in extension, particularly it seems like 3 or 4 years ago, we did a lot of work, and it's continuing to be done, but like on rain gardens and all the mitigation that can do as far as not only slowing the rainwater, but all of the runoff, which I'd never considered, all of the contaminants that are in the runoff. And rain gardens are a little different because they are highly engineered with berms and everything's at a certain slope and level to capture a given amount of rainwater and hold it for a given amount of time. So all that relates to that too, I guess.
Yes. Well, and to kind of step back a little bit to the example Brett was talking about, that to kind of illustrate how much rain that trees can hold. You can't really do it with a giant tree because that would be very hard, but something where you can kind of shake the trunk. And I don't know if you all have done this. I've done this because I'm a bad person, but when it's recently rained and you're walking under a tree, you can shake the trunk and it'll dump a whole lot of water on anybody else you're walking with. But just as a way to kind of illustrate how much water is sitting on those trees and being prevented from washing out. And that's just one small tree.
Or in like kind of reverse, if it's raining, you seek shelter under a tree because less water is going to hit you, which means the tree is holding on to some of it.
Yeah, the leaves are going to try to channel that to the stems, or at least drop them slowly within the drip line. And all those things like rain gardens, etc., they're all there to kind of slow rainwater down and to try to help it infiltrate the soil where it is, rather than just essentially kicking the problem to the curb and letting it
taking all those nutrients into the Gulf.
Right.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting because you think of trees as their root systems are soaking up water and retaining soil, which they certainly do. and you think of it as, yeah, maybe slowing it down as things. But if you think about, as you said, one small tree, then make that a big tree, then multiply that times 1,000 trees, and suddenly that small incremental amount of water per leaf is multiplied times a huge amount of volume. And some of that water is just going to sit on the leaf until it evaporates off.
Right.
It's never even going to make it into the stormwater collection thing. It's going to go stay in that water cycle outside. And so I thought that was really
That
interesting.
concept of vertical and horizontal spaces and landscapes, that's so critical. And surface area, because I guess each leaf could be looked at as surface area. For you, it's important because you can shake it on people as they walk by behind you.
Yeah, and they'll never see it coming.
Why are you the way you are?
You'd have to ask my parents, probably my sister.
Nature versus nurture, I don't know.
Branch shaker.
Yeah, tree shaker. That's his alternative name is Josh Tree Shaker.
Yeah.
Isn't there like a Steve Miller song that talks about that?
Yeah.
If not, there should be.
Want to taste your peaches? Let me shake your tree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what he's talking about.
Yeah, obviously.
He's a horticulturalist.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've actually
Landscape
Part of
concept.
horticulture.
Landscape
We've gone into
concept.
music now.
We'll talk about fruit trees at some point. We'll bring this back up.
Millions of peaches. I mean, peaches for free. Even.
Peaches and cream.
Yes, all the peaches.
Well, and there's
Josh,
Know
once
what I-
again,
know
said,
what I
these
mean?
people, I'm
what I
trying to
mean?
be
Peaches and
professional.
cream.
Josh is the professional here.
right. Well, yeah, when you had mentioned that, I had just seen a statistic on this page about how mature deciduous trees that lose their leaves, can intercept just a single mature tree 500 to 700 gallons of water a year.
Wow.
And mature evergreen trees can intercept more than 4,000 gallons a year.
Because it's
That's
rainy
individual tree.
in the wintertime sometimes.
And they are active in the winter.
In Kentucky,
Yeah.
it is very rainy in the wintertime. It's mostly just mud season. So
So I got a question. What in this publication that you're
Referencing.
alleging to have written?
Allegedly.
Just because your name's
Yes,
on it doesn't
may
mean
or may
anything.
you may have a
A
publication
name
in
very
front of
similar
us.
to mine.
Yeah.
Why is it penciled in? Why is your name penciled in on it?
In this publication you wrote, do you have there is a list of some or links to some actual species recommendations,
Yes.
or there's a chart or something?
Yeah.
Well,
there's a-
before you jump into it, is this where does natives versus non-natives fit into this conversation? Is that part of this or not? We'll
yes.
probably do a whole episode on natives and non-natives.
yes.
Yes,
Well-
natives definitely play a role because of what they are providing to kind of the community biodiversity, providing habitat for native insects, native birds.
Yeah, I was
all
wondering
those
about the habitat angle of all of this. Yeah, I'd love to hear your take on that more in a minute.
Well, yes, exactly. Like natives are definitely very good or important, crucial even for providing that habitat that our built environments tend to fragment or just outright destroy habitat for native species that we do want to keep around. Even if it's something that, we don't think of a songbird as eating the tree or the landscape plant itself, but they eat the insect that has co-evolved to eat on that plant or be around and located among that plant. And so, yeah, native plants are kind of crucial in the role of sort of preserving the biodiversity potential of these built environments.
Do any of you guys see much interest in as far as landscaping and taking into account like the natural world and habitat and things like that? Do you guys get questions? Any of you guys here? Do you see any of that?
I get questions. Well, I get a lot of questions. People are coming in. So my area of the state especially has a lot of people who have moved from usually other states, sometimes other coastlines. And so there's a lot of people.
Other what?
Other coastlines.
Oh,
I don't know why.
coastlines.
It's like
Coastline.
I thought you said cosine.
Cool.
I was like,
did we slip
cosine?
into
What is
some
this?
trigonometry?
Yeah.
Maybe
Socotello?
coastlines? Anyways, yeah. So they've
Adjacent over
come in from
hypotenuse?
California and places like that. And so our plant life here is very different. And they come in, and I'm grateful that they do. And they say, well, what do I plant? And they say, like, these are my goals. Usually they're not necessarily slowing water, but sometimes it's shade. I want to be able to sit in my backyard, those kinds of things. I want something to flower, blah, blah, blah. And I always start them with natives. And because I tell them they're much more likely to survive here. So if you want this tree to live, the highest likelihood of it to live, then put it there. And then all that feeds into, Josh, what you've been talking about. So it's not only that the caterpillar has to have this tree to complete its life cycle, and therefore the bird eats it and blah blah blah. But also that plant's going to live, so it's more likely to support that ecosystem. It's also more likely to break up that clay soil so that there are some places for that water to infiltrate, right? It's following those root systems and going down in there. So it is, yes, the ecosystem that way, but as the soil nerd here, I'm thinking about how water infiltrates and how much better typically native plants are at doing that in the ecosystem, unless you're bush honeysuckle, which is not native and is invasive. And it's, I guess, it holds up a bank. Like, it holds up a bank.
It's adaptable as hell.
It's adaptable as hell. So,
you guys know, side note, do you guys know the sexiest tree?
Schumer oak.
Bald cypress.
Oh, man. Been waiting on that one.
You know the sexiest bird?
Bald eagle?
I would say maybe like a grackle.
Stepped into that. I know.
Yeah, we did. We just stepped right. He
Lobbing
was waiting.
softballs with
He's like, we're
curve.
going to say it.
It's like yellow
Too
eyes.
easy.
Piercing.
Too easy. It's too easy.
I don't know what a grackle looks like. I'm going to have to.
It's
like
not
a
really
raven.
as pretty as a bald eagle.
I'm Googling right
corvid.
now as we speak.
It's a large, scary
We have
critter.
some grackles that have like posted up in the bird bath out front, and
Nice.
they will not let even the blue jays can't get in.
I thought you were talking like
Good
a
for them. Blue
breakfast
jays are
cereal.
bullies.
Yeah, and he got bullied by a blue jay a couple of years ago,
Wow.
and I went out and swole up on it, and it flew away.
Did you? Did you though?
I did.
And it was not intimidating.
True story. It
Uh,
was like, oh,
yeah, this bird.
this guy's
bird
got
looks
enough
like
problems.
It doesn't take
Gotta
any
stop
crap.
bullying
This
his
guy's
wife.
having a bad
For those of you who don't know what a grackle is and haven't Googled it yet, this bird definitely looks like it doesn't take no crap from nobody.
Yeah, they got like yellow eyes.
He's got their beady eyes. It's like, you want something? You need something from me,
It's a
bro?
bird designed by Stephen King.
He's definitely being
basically.
the mob. Definitely being the mob.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is a
The
mob.
familia.
Casting aspersions over here.
Yeah.
I mean, they call it like I see it.
It's no Robin.
It is.
So we were going to talk about the species list a little bit.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a couple of different tables.
These
There's-
aren't all native species. Some of them are non-native.
Correct.
Which
And-
I am not. I am not a native purist in the landscape, for what it's worth. If anybody's out there feeling
Sure.
bad about their hostas, or
Because some of
their
our natives are
Japanese
getting wiped
maples or
out by
whatever.
insects and diseases,
Yeah.
so they're not immune.
But I do totally agree with their, like, a lot of them are pretty tough cookies. in
If
the-
they're
in the
native for a
landscape.
reason.
Yeah.
They're native for a
There's
reason.
no silver bullet in any kind of ag or horticulture. There's room for
Right.
all, right?
Yeah, it's biology. There's never really a firm boundary anywhere. There's
Yeah.
always
And it's always changing.
Ginkgos aren't
Yeah.
native. That doesn't mean I love them any less.
right.
But they're
Yeah.
the
I mean, they
dinosaur
were
tree.
once. That's the thing, right?
True.
The,
I
the
mean,
boundary of
What
like,
timeline are we
invasive
talking
about?
versus native. What natives are kind of looking at a pre-Columbian exchange moment. Why is that the moment we say?
Mm.
It's not the giant sloth moment.
Not
I
to
don't
get
know why.
too conceptual.
Yeah, why is Italian food associated with tomatoes?
All right.
You know,
Yeah. Well,
that
I mean,
ain't always
honestly,
been that way.
Facts.
Yeah.
So to get back to these tables,
But cheese.
Turning these tables back to the table.
Parma.
It has always been about cheese. Anyways,
everywhere
tables.
you go, it's cheese.
Cheese trees, yes.
So yes, there are a list of tables. Some are just about here are landscape plants that have a high tolerance to certain, like for example, there's a series of tables at the beginning that there are landscape plants with a high tolerance to air quality issues, and that might be something to reference if you are near where lots of traffic goes by or something like that.
Smog
Yeah, things to be
city.
aware of. But the kind of master reference table at the end of this document is one that lists, whether or not this is a native species, whether or not it's an approved Lexington tree species,
Mhm.
which the Lexington street tree sort of, I don't want to call it a
Ordinance.
ordinance. I
Yeah.
was going to say regime, but it doesn't sound right. But no, ordinance is good. These are trees that don't create a lot of street litter and things like that. It's not everywhere is Lexington, but this is a
If you were going to
tree that works,
plant it in the strip between the sidewalk and the road,
right.
these
and
are ones that
easement-
they're like, that's pretty chill.
Yeah, exactly. So it tells you whether or not it's one of those trees, whether or not it's native, what its maximum height is, and then there's a list of ecosystem services that trees can provide, and it tells you how these species compare to others. Is it good for resistance to storm damage? Things associated with being functional and easily maintained in the landscape. Because even though trees are really great at surviving, for a long time. Even after you do something that effectively kills them, it will live for 10 more years. But we should also remember that trees in the built environment, it's kind of in a not natural environment. Typically, trees are in forests where they're surrounded by all their buddies, and they can deal with heavy storms and winds. Whereas in the built environment, you might just have a tree lone on the landscape, and that's, hard for that tree. So we do have to kind of keep an eye on them and try to help them
He's
out.
a very
when we
social
can.
tree. Okay.
Yes.
Likes friends.
Yeah, they want to have all these associations and friends all around them to deal with big
I did
storms.
some interesting reading where some of the trees, you take them out of the forest environment, and basically they're much more susceptible to problems breaking and coming down
Right.
just because they don't have their buddies on either side to act as a web.
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting when you take them out of their system.
That's like you guys are for me. You're my little support system. You hold me
Yeah.
up in the world.
You're,
So you want
you're our
to-
little, you're like a little pawpaw, and we're like some oaks and hickories and stuff.
I'm a little papa.
You're a little understory.
I'm a little understory.
You're not.
I'm not.
I feel like
She just-
if anybody's the pawpaw
she
here,
just-
it's me.
Yeah, wait a minute. I was gonna claim that, but I thought you said Papa. Sorry, I was gonna claim Papa, but you said Papa. I'm so sorry.
You can be a red bud, Ray.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you. Yes, I like
with the
that too.
heart
Who
and
wants to be a little
leaves.
dog word? Yes.
Yeah.
What is, since we're on that kind of topic, what is either the tree you identify with or your favorite kind of landscape plant?
Ooh.
Oh man.
It's like picking a favorite tree is like picking a favorite child. I mean, you could do
Easy.
it, but you're not
One
supposed
always stands
it's-
out as the best.
It's whatever I grew up with. It's the stuff I saw.
All right, Josh, you go first. You ask the question.
It's yours.
I usually tell people that my favorite one to recommend is the Schumert oak because
I
it's
knew it.
awesome at everything.
It's awesome at everything.
But
No.
in
doubt.
reality, the tree that I always get excited to see is a ginkgo,
Yeah.
What's the tree that's like the most humble? Because that would be me.
the Joshua tree.
Yeah, nice.
I'm big,
Okay, so we're going like things that would be around Kentucky or that somebody would
Yeah,
put in the
yeah,
landscape.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
I
if you want
like,
to get wild and like talk about your experiences in Ohio,
Yeah.
ew, why? Just kidding, Ohio. we
Only
love
crossing
you.
that
Gross.
only crossing that river twice. Once to leave and once to come back.
once because I made a wrong turn.
I really like recommending the black gum, Nissa sylvatica. She's one of my favorite. I don't know where she lands on the list for ecosystem services, although it does provide berries and stuff for
What's the
It's on
genus?
here.
Nissa.
Mm.
Nissa sylvatica.
Good resistance to insect pests. Actually, excellent.
Excellent.
Excellent resistance to disease problems.
She my girl.
Yeah, good for storm damage resistance.
Uh-huh.
Will grow on poorly drained soil. What a great
Whoop
tree.
whoop.
And
Nice one.
will grow in hot, dry areas.
Oh, hey, girl.
Not easy to transplant.
That's true.
Finicky,
That's true.
fickle.
That's true.
So make a commitment.
I,
Put a ring on it.
Withstands city
Or,
conditions.
Yes. And she
Growth
got
rings on it.
beautiful
Yeah, put some growth
red
rings
fall
on it.
color. So from a visual perspective, we get pretty red fall color, nice glossy leaves, and all summer long, spring, nice glossy leaves. And I don't know, I named my kid Nissa. I feel like that's a cool name.
You
I don't
would
have
or you
one.
did?
I would.
Nessie or Nissa? One's a monster and one's a tree.
Or both.
Okay, monstrous tree.
Yeah, monsters tree. So
mysterious either.
I like that one.
Yes.
She's a slow grower, though. I don't know if that's on your list or not, but she's fairly slow growing. So just keeping that in mind. We have
Yeah,
a
it says fair.
fair
growth.
yeah.
To be fair.
To be
To
To be
fair.
fair.
But maxes out at like 30 feet.
I like
so
the mid-story
Yeah.
trees. I grew up in the hills, so I'm always. You guys have already mentioned it. The dogwoods and redbuds, man.
Mm.
I love those kind of mid-sized, mid-story trees. I don't know if they're ones that are recommended. I know they're well adapted to at least the eastern part. Well, most parts of Kentucky they're adapted, but they take a specific growing environment because they are kind of mid-story.
Just
they're-
like you, Ray. You just
Yeah.
have to have a specific growing environment.
Yeah, that's to flourish. That's
Don't
and
we
I'm
all?
just showing
It
up
includes
only in the
bacon.
spring, and the rest of the year I disappear. Yeah, just like that. Yeah. Brett,
Okay.
you have any favorites?
I would say from around here, if I'm going conifer, I have a pretty strong affinity for Virginia pine.
Fan.
Not white pine.
I really love white pines, but riding around with extension agents who have caught a lot of white pine bodies in their day, or not maybe not caught them, but were around when the bodies
Witness
were caught.
Witness the
the-
carcasses.
Disposed of.
If you have not heard of white pine decline, get in line.
it's a thing.
Because it's time.
Look it up because it's a sad. So don't plant any white pines in the landscape out there. Sad. But I would say Virginia pine, and then the deciduous side, I would say I have a real affinity for hornbeams, Carpinus in general.
Mm-hmm.
Carpinus caroliniana is the American hornbeam. There's also Carpinus, like a couple of like Korean hornbeams and Japanese hornbeams that are really cool. But as far as stuff around here, I would say those are two of my faves.
I'm big fan. It's a good pick. Beeches. Oh, I
Oh,
love,
yeah.
I love a beech tree. Oh, I love a beech tree.
It's
She-
the bark and the leaves.
She
on
real
it.
cute. She real
The
cute.
danglers, I heard somebody referring to it as like in the fall when the beech leaves are still, they're the ones that still hang on like pretty much all winter, the little golden,
Mhm.
that it's like being in the tree, in the forest with a bunch of ghosts.
That was me.
Oh. What if I was like some moron the other day was
Some
saying
idiot.
about the
Somebody said it was the most ridiculous thing
Did
I've
you
ever
say it on the
heard.
podcast too? Probably. Like, yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll take that back.
No, I think I think that was off podcast. But yeah, if you've ever wondered, if you don't know what a beech tree looks like, when you drive in, past some woods or something, and all the leaves are gone, but you see those little understory trees, and they become really big trees, but
Yeah.
they're small, and they all the leaves are still on. So there's this kind of white, yellow, gold
Mhm.
leaf, and they look like these little ghosts that are just like friendly ghosts. Like if you
Casper.
okay, has anybody in here seen Brave, the
like the
Disney
will o'
movie?
the wisps.
Yes.
They remind me of
Oh,
will-o-wisps.
see
Yeah.
you,
Disney, please don't sue us. I'm complimenting you.
Sorry,
but they
Merida.
remind,
Sorry.
they remind me of
Fair
will-o-wisps.
use.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Shout out to Sarah Bareilles.
beach
trees. So many good trees, you all. So many good trees.
They have beautiful bark too. I think
They
somebody
do.
said that.
They're
It's
smooth.
just so pretty.
like elephants.
It's all about the bark.
I love
It's
maple
like-
trees too, though. I love sugar maples. I love Japanese maples.
I like the underdogs like sycamores too, which get a bad
Oh,
rap. I
man.
love the
Yeah.
sycamore bar. You mentioned bark.
They're so sculptural.
Yeah.
And, like,
yeah.
Tortured, like yeah.
Tortured.
They have
They
a
look tortured. They
They have
look
a lot
like
of architectural aspect to them. They
Yeah.
do. They do a lot of interest in the wintertime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Josh
But
is like looking at his chart as we say all these trees, and he's like negative.
Junk tree.
Negative.
Junk tree.
Garbage.
These are actually all really good trees you all are
Oh, thanks.
enjoying. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, American Beach, that's an approved Lexington Street tree.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good
Kind
job,
of surprised.
Lexington.
Yeah. That's,
Is that Fagus grandifolia?
Yes, it
Boom.
is.
I'm so
With this
proud
guy
of you.
with the
Thank you.
Linnaean
I'm trying to learn the language.
He's-
not its
he's-
Scottish
he's
cousin
got it.
Fergus, but Fagus.
As a reminder for those of you,
That's my cousin Fergus grandifolia.
Hey. Sorry, that was terrible.
Please don't call me Mr. Grandifolia. That's my dad. Call me Fergus.
Call me Fergus.
as a reminder for those of you who maybe forgot, the reason we keep bringing up Lexington is because the university that we work for is in Lexington. The hub of it is, so it's very easy to access their goods. So,
But many
I live there.
and many of you, some of you might be in areas that have their own ordinances and
Mhm.
that kind of thing. But in general, if going by climate zones is a good idea to just make sure that if you're finding something, if you're not in Kentucky and you're listening to this, there might be something similar, or some of these species, a lot of the ecosystem services that Josh is talking about are going to apply no matter where it is, as long as that thing will work in your zone.
Yeah, and I think we've touched on all the ecosystem services except for one, which is probably the most nerdy, carbon sequestration.
hit me with it.
That's on a bigger scale, isn't it? Probably.
Yeah. I mean, trees are
Trees are trees.
trees sequester carbon from the environment,
What?
from the atmosphere. Even wow. I
Mm.
mean, essentially, like half of the weight of a tree is literally carbon.
Mm.
And it's pulling that out of the environment and locking it up for depending on how long the tree lives and what is done with it at the end of its life. Is it converted into something? Is it buried? Or is it just turned into wood chips and allowed to kind of degrade? But taking a tree's carbon out of the atmosphere and holding it for 100 years does have an impact on, or can be calculated as global warming potential. So what I did my master's on, I don't have to necessarily talk about this extensively,
Thank God.
but I will.
Don't tempt him.
One thing I did want to just ask, the ecosystem service concept.
Mhm.
This comes out of ecology and ecology's efforts to communicate with other groups and explain things. Is that right? Am I off base there? Just the central concept of ecosystem services. Is that something that people talk about with other things in the world besides just landscape plants?
Good question. I believe so. I mean, and pretty much anything can be talked about as being a contributor to ecosystem services, and they are that, these are services that come about from the community of plants and structures around you, as to whether or not they're providing something as kind of a net benefit, right? It's kind of like an ecosystem service being the opposite of something in the environment that is toxic, right? Which is creating a drain on everybody or a cost associated with being there. Ecosystem services are things that are being done for us, for everyone, and not exclusive.
Okay.
So we should think of all horticulture as what are the ecosystem services?
You want to
It's
ask
like one of the
yourself,
aspects
what do
of the
I get
system.
out of this?
Landscape systems are so inclusive, and you can look at them so many ways. This is one of the really cool lenses you can use to look at landscapes. One of the features that's just so cool with these large, especially these large installations that are just so complex and have so many facets to them, so many different moving parts. It's just a really cool way to kind of view things, is those benefits. And sometimes that's intended up front in the design, and sometimes you kind of conceptualize those benefits later on when you're taking stock of the environment. But really cool.
Yeah. So to sum us up here, I think it seems like we've talked about if you are considering doing some landscaping, if you're considering adding trees or shrubs or other kinds of plants to your landscape, you can consider, yes, is it the right soil type? Is it the right, is my fertility right? Is the placement in terms of sun or shade or soil moisture, are those things right? But also don't forget about how within the landscape, the way that plant is placed, the choice of plant that you use can work to serve you, serve the landscape, serve the surrounding biosphere, the plants, the animals, the soil microbes, everything else. And so when you think about that, consider looking at this publication that Josh has mentioned and take a look at these different ecosystem services, these roles that a tree can play in your ecosystem of your landscape. Considering things like water management, wind management, sun management, pollution, all those kinds of stuff, carbon sequestration. Those are all these elements that you can think about if you have a south-facing window that gets super hot in the summertime, put a deciduous tree in front of it. If you have an area where the cold air blows through the window at night and makes your little toes cold in the wintertime, consider maybe a coniferous windbreak there, something like that. Conversely, if you have something that we want to soak up some water or keep an area from flooding as much, you might think about selecting something with that type of functionality. Josh, did I miss? Oh, yeah. And one other component in the city environments or places that are a little bit more noisy, noise management, a sound buffer of sorts is another way that you might consider using landscape plants. So I would say if you want to hear us talk about landscape plants and landscaping and ornamentals more, let us know. Alexis will let you know how to get in contact with us. But thank you very much for listening. Thanks, Josh, for sharing all this stuff.
Great publication. Once again, what's the name and number on that publication?
HO 121, Ecosystem Services of Landscape Plants, a guide for consumers and communities.
We'll put a link where you guys can find that. But don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Horticulture Podcast. You can definitely message us on there if that's easier. You can email any of us. All of those emails are available. And if you are curious, if you want to hear more about any of this, please let us know. I could talk about perennial plants all day. Would love to.
Ray could talk about landscaping.
Please
love it all.
I could talk about bonsai if anybody wanted that.
If that's what we're talking about.
I personally would like for us to do that. But anyways, we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us. Join us next week. We're going to talk about some myths of horticulture with y'all. So thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.